What's up, beautiful people? My name is Joe and I'm a non-binary tattoo artist based in the south coast of the UK. Welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about the different places you can tattoo, so different types of skin and how that can vary, how difficult it is to tattoo in those different places. Also other little things such as moles and bruises, etc. So grab a cuppa and get comfy. This video is mainly for tattoo apprentices or people that are just starting to get into tattooing, thinking about it. But also, I suppose it can be for you, the person who is getting tattooed, because there's a couple of things to consider that can affect your design. So let's just start with general body areas and different types of skin. You may notice on your body and other people's bodies, there's fleshy parts and there's bony parts. Some are more fleshy than others. Generally, you want to go very careful, make sure you don't go too deep over the bony areas. That's something that you really need to be careful of when you're first learning to tattoo, such as elbows. You can start around this area, and as soon as you creep over to the bony bit, don't need to go quite as deep, so be careful there. Same as the inside. The skin is very stretchy, a bit weird, it goes red, it bleeds a lot, it will raise, and it'll be kind of hard to see what you're doing. You just want to avoid doing anything too technical in those areas around elbows, knees, any other sort of joint really. Go low on the detail. The fleshy bits that I consider fleshy are the bits in between the joints. Around the forearm, middle of the arm, thigh, lower leg. The only exception, I think, to this is shin. The fleshy area on the back of your calf, you can do loads of detail, a lovely area to tattoo. When you start creeping around to the shin, you've got to be really careful not to go too deep and to bleed those lines, because then you'll ruin the tattoo. Different types of skin can affect the way that you tattoo. If someone's skin is very oily, you will notice that the carbon does not stay on very well. Something to be a little bit wary of. It's very hard to tell when you look at someone if they've got oily skin or not. Once you start tattooing, you'll realise if the carbon is coming off or not. Best advice is to alcohol spray the skin before you stick the carbon on. That should take the level of oil off of the skin. Then you have the opposite of that. If someone has really dry skin and a bit lower, scaly, a little bit like a dinosaur, again, it's kind of hard to stick the carbon on nice and clearly. But I would green soap alcohol everyone's skin and hope that the carbon sticks on nicely and doesn't come off mid-tattoo. I would also advise shaving everyone, only in the place that you're tattooing them, not the whole body, obviously. Not only does this help with your carbon sticking on nice and clear, but also hygiene reasons, because there's little particles of dirt in those hair fibres that you want to get off and clean the skin nicely, make it sterile before you start tattooing. Other things to consider are pretty much any other mark or blemish on the skin. Bruises, scabs, moles, psoriasis, eczema and stretch marks, old scars. I don't know if I said scars, maybe. Any sort of mark on the skin will affect the tattoo. You want to avoid moles at all costs, because you're supposed to keep an eye out if the mole changes colour or expands. If you tattooed all over it, you're not going to be able to see that. When it comes to scabs, bruises, psoriasis and eczema, avoid tattooing the area where there are those blemishes, because the ink just won't stay in. The skin has been affected, therefore it is healing and it will just push the ink out. It will also bleed a lot more than other areas, so it's just worth avoiding those areas instead of tattooing over them, because you're going to have to touch them up at a later date. Especially if someone has psoriasis or eczema, just try and avoid those areas anyway, because you don't want to make that worse. Hello, it is future me. When I was editing this video, I realised that I didn't cover scars. Naughty! You can tattoo over scars as long as they are fully healed. Otherwise it'll be super painful because the skin is still recovering. Every scar is totally different. Some kind of go into the skin, some are more raised, some are wide, some are thin. So tattooing over scars can be a little bit tricky because it's always going to feel a little bit different. It isn't going to feel the same as tattooing over fully healed skin. The lines will be affected, the shading will be affected, it'll probably bleed a little bit more, go a little bit more red, but you can tattoo over them. Just be a little bit cautious and limit the amount of detail in those areas. Back to you, Past Joe. Another thing that might actually affect you tattooing and how hard it is to tattoo is anywhere kind of in the torso area, because you've got to think about your client breathing. And it's very important that they do breathe, obviously. However, if you're doing anything on the chest or even on their back, because they're going to be lying on their front, you're going to go with that movement of them breathing. I always tell my clients to do long, deep, slow breaths, controlled, count them because it helps you take your mind away, rather than the short, sharp breath. And that's because you're going to be leaning on their body, and it does affect you with their breathing because you're going to be moving up and down. So there are times where it just makes it harder to get a nice straight line. If you're doing straight lines or any sort of line, it's really hard when that person's moving, and you notice it more when it's the torso area because of their breathing. So bear that in mind. If you're thinking about doing a whopping straight line down someone, it's going to be really hard in that area, rather than an arm or something and they can sit still. Well, hopefully they'll sit still, and then you've got more chance of getting that line nice and straight and not a line that goes woohoo. Areas that I try to avoid at all costs because they are so hard to tattoo, or to look, just to look good, that you can tattoo them but they just look a bit rubbish. Fingers are so hard to tattoo. Not only is it really hard just to get your hands in the right place, but the ink just comes out, or you've got to go too deep, so therefore it bleeds a little bit. It's just not going to be that crisp, very detailed thing that you see on Pinterest, which is probably not even a real tattoo. So that includes fingers, toes. Toes are a nightmare as well. Also, ears. I've tattooed a few ears, and it's just, the skin is weird. It's like the needle just kind of disappears and then it just bleeds, and when you see them healed, it's kind of the same thing as fingers. Bit of a waste of time. And it's so fiddly. I just like have my hands all in people's ears and face. And another place is this weird kind of no man's land here. So there's nothing to push behind, and it's just stretchy skin. It's very awkward to tattoo. It's not very nice for the client as well. There's a lot of skin. It's just one of those slightly more tricky places to tattoo. If you're unsure of if you're going to go too deep or not, go lighter and you can always make it deeper. If you go too deep, it's really not good, especially when you're coming up to a joint, somewhere that's a little bit more bony. Just go a little bit lighter. Make sure that the design is kind of not too crazy with the detail, because it's harder to get that sort of crisp line compared to other areas on the body. So in general, just be a little bit cautious when you're tattooing, go on the lighter side, and then you can always go over it once you kind of got a feel with what the skin, what that area is doing. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give me a thumbs up if you did, please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.